Phones today have come a long way and they can now capture stunning shots of the night sky using computational photography. Here's an example I took with my 4-year-old Pixel 4a. You'd be surprised at the detail you can get even with an older model. I had to escape the city lights and head to a place with minimal light pollution and of course a clear sky to capture this shot. I used a tripod, aimed the camera at the sky and let it work its magic in night mode for a few minutes. This is the result I got. I think most of the high-end phones should give you similar results if you try. To really bring out the colors and fine details of the Milky Way, I'll be editing it in the Lightroom app. The main goal here is to make the galaxy in the center really pop, while also removing some of the distractions in the frame. For example, there's the moon hiding behind some haze which didn't come out too great. First up, I'm going to use the crop tool. I'll keep the original aspect ratio and crop it so the galaxy sits right at the center. That way the moon gets cut out too, which is a bonus. I am leaving a bit of the foreground in the shot because I like being able to identify the location later, just a personal preference. Of course, I can always crop it further down the line if it doesn't quite work. Next, I'm moving over to the remove menu where I'll be using the heal tool to take care of those pesky electrical wires. They're a bit of an ISO, especially in a shot like this where you want the focus to be on the natural beauty of the sky. I will adjust the brush size to fit the wires, then just lightly brush over them. The heal tool should do a great job of blending the area seamlessly and making the wires disappear as if they were never there. It's a simple trick, but it really cleans up the image and makes a big difference in the final look. Now, I'm going to dive into the light menu and start working on the overall exposure. The first step is to reduce the highlights. This will help pull out more details from the brighter areas, especially between the clusters of stars. Then I will raise the shadows, which flattens the image a bit but allows us to recover as much detail as possible from the darker regions. At this point, the image may look a bit flat, but that's intentional. We are trying to bring out every detail before focusing on the contrast. Next, to make only the stars stand out, I will reduce the blacks. This will darken the space between the stars, helping the Milky Way really start to pop. You can already see it becoming more prominent at this stage. Finally, I will increase the whites. This will brighten the brightest parts of the image, which in this case are mainly the stars and the Milky Way itself, giving it that iconic glow. Now that I have worked on the exposure and brought out those details, it's time to head over to the color menu to add some vibrancy. The first thing I will do is bump up the saturation, which will instantly make the colors of the galaxy more prominent. We'll notice that not only does the Milky Way's natural color stand out, but the blues in the image start to pop as well. Sometimes a bit too much for my liking. To fine-tune that, I will head into the HSL sliders under the mix section of the color menu. Here, I will reduce the saturation of the blues so they don't overpower the image. I want the focus to be on the galaxy, not on any overly saturated patches of sky. Next, I will move the hues of the purples towards magenta, giving the Milky Way a more vibrant, otherworldly feel. This little tweak helps add more depth and a unique tone to the galaxy, making it look even more magical. Finally, I will increase both the saturation and brightness of these areas to really make them shine. It's a balancing act, but these subtle adjustments help create a visually stunning result where the galaxy is the star of the show, quite literally. Next, I'm heading over to the detail menu to sharpen up the image. But instead of applying sharpness to the entire photo, I'm going to do it selectively. This is where the masking slider comes in handy. By moving the slider to the right, I'm essentially telling the software to sharpen only the areas with distinct edges, like the stars, while leaving the smoother parts of the sky untouched. This is a great trick because you don't want to add sharpness to everything. Otherwise, you end up with noise and grain creeping into the softer areas, especially in night sky shots. Now it's time to selectively make the Milky Way really stand out. I'm going to use the masking filters, and for this I'll mostly rely on radial filters to target the specific areas of the galaxy and give them a little extra pop. Firstly, I will place a mask over the central part of the Milky Way. By increasing the whites and decreasing the shadows, I will create some contrast that makes the stars and dust clouds more prominent. Then I will bump up the highlights, which brightens up the surrounding areas, giving the galaxy a soft glow. I might even increase the overall exposure a bit, but I'm careful not to overdo it. To balance things out, I will lower the shadows a little, just enough to keep the image dynamic without losing too much detail in the darker areas. Next, I will move over to the color section of this radial filter and add a touch of temperature to warm up this part of the Milky Way. This adds a slight golden glow to the stars and brings out more warmth in the overall color of the galaxy. I will also throw in a bit of saturation to make those colors more vivid, but again it's all about subtlety here. Once that's done, I'll duplicate the filter and move it up to another part of the galaxy that's a little less bright. Since this area doesn't need as much enhancement, I'll keep the adjustments minimal, letting the natural brightness speak for itself. It's all about bringing out the best in each part of the Milky Way without making it look over-processed. I'm adding one more radial filter on the right side now. Compared to the bright cluster on the left, this section of the galaxy isn't as luminous in the original image. But let's see how much detail and color we can bring out. I will apply similar adjustments here, bumping up the whites and highlights and adjusting the shadows to find a nice balance without pushing it too far. The goal is to enhance the colors and make the section pop a little more, but without going overboard. I don't want this area to overpower the main cluster on the left, so I'm being more subtle with the adjustments here. I will keep an eye on how the temperature and tint interact to make sure the color tones stay consistent with the rest of the image. I'm aiming for that natural glow, making the colored cluster stand out, but still maintaining the overall balance. Next, I will apply a few more radial filters across the image in other spots where those colored clusters of stars are visible. I want to make them more prominent, but I'm also trying to match the tones and colors across the image. So I'll be fine-tuning the tint and temperature settings as needed to ensure everything looks cohesive. The idea is to pull out those beautiful colors and textures without making any one area too distracting. It's always worth spending some time adjusting the size and position of the filters to see if tweaking the brightness or color can improve the image even more. It's a bit of a trial and error process sometimes. A slight change can make a big difference, but you have to be cautious not to push things too far and end up with an unrealistic result. For the next step, I'm adding a large radial filter to cover the entire galaxy. This allows me to make some global adjustments that affect the whole area rather than just isolated spots. I'll fine-tune things like brightness, contrast, and color balance on a broader scale, ensuring the entire galaxy looks cohesive and vibrant. It's about enhancing the overall image while maintaining that natural, stunning appearance. Balancing these global adjustments is key to achieving a polished look without overdoing it. So I will keep an eye on the changes and make sure everything blends together nicely. I'm heading back to the color menu for some final global adjustments to the white balance. I'm adding just a touch of temperature to warm things up and get rid of some of the blue tones in the sky. I will also experiment with the tint to see if it can enhance the colors in the image a bit more, making the overall scene more vibrant. Next, I'm adding a linear gradient filter at the bottom of the image. This will let me reduce the saturation in the foreground, which helps keep the focus on the night sky above. Of course, if the foreground is still a bit distracting, you could always crop it out to emphasize just the night sky, as mentioned earlier. Here's the before and after the edit. It's always a good idea to step back and make any final tweaks if necessary to get the best possible result. Sometimes those little adjustments can make a big difference. Do you do astrophotography with your phone or a dedicated camera? I would love to hear from you in the comments, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. I'll be back with another video soon. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching.